Inez, an 80-year-old woman with silvery hair and soft wrinkles that told a lifetime of stories, sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she picked up the cold, untouched plate of soup in front of her. It was her 80th birthday, a day meant for celebration, for love, and for being surrounded by family. Instead, it felt like just another Tuesday. Her daughter, Emily, and son-in-law, Mark, had promised they'd spend the day with her, but instead, they'd gone off to a luxurious 5-star resort without so much as a phone call to check in. All the while, Inez had been sitting at home alone, waiting for her family to come and share her special day. She couldn't stop the lump that formed in her throat as she stared at the untouched meal, memories of days long gone flooding back. She had worked so hard to build a comfortable life for her family. She had given everything to make sure her daughter was happy and well cared for. Yet here she was, left behind, with only the ticking clock and the empty space where laughter and love should have been. But what hurt more than the absence of her family was the realization that they had taken something from her, the very thing she had worked so tirelessly for, her pension fund. The money she had saved for years, hoping it would allow her to enjoy her later years, was now being enjoyed by the very people she thought she could trust. It wasn't just the stolen money that made her blood boil. It was the betrayal. The thought that they had never planned on honoring her in any way. It was as if her value had faded with time, like an old photo left to gather dust. She had been suspicious for weeks, but it wasn't until she stumbled upon a bank statement hidden among some old paperwork that the truth hit her like a slap across the face. Mark and Emily had used her pension to fund their lavish lifestyle. The realization made Inez's heart ache with grief. They thought she'd never find out, that she'd be too old, too weak, too quiet to notice. But they were wrong. Inez wasn't going to let this betrayal go unpunished. She kept the receipts, each one an undeniable piece of evidence that they had taken what was rightfully hers. She sat there for a long time, contemplating her next move. Her eyes flickered toward the drawer where she kept her lawyer's number. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper with the proof she had gathered, and she felt a surge of determination wash over her. The world had underestimated her for far too long. The plan was simple, but it would shake them to their core. She would let them believe they had won. Let them enjoy their wealth for now, but when the time was right, she would reveal the truth. Every hidden detail, every stolen penny. She would show them the price of betrayal. As she closed the drawer and stood up, she whispered to herself, "They thought I'd never know, but I do." The sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty house, louder than ever before. The next day, Inez sat in her small living room, the scent of her old wooden furniture mingling with a faint perfume of lavender that she kept by her window. She hadn't heard from Emily or Mark. No apology, no explanation, just silence. It was as if they had forgotten the very woman who had raised one of them, who had sacrificed her own comfort to ensure their happiness. Inez had always prided herself on being a strong woman. She raised her daughter alone after her husband's untimely passing. She had worked countless hours as a nurse, then as a caregiver, never complaining, always giving. Her pension wasn't just money, it was a symbol of her years of hard work and dedication. But now, it was gone, replaced by the empty promises of the people she loved most. Her heart burned with resentment, but it was more than that. She felt foolish. How had she allowed herself to be so blind? Her daughter had always been spoiled, always expected more than what she had worked for. But Inez had never imagined that she would cross a line so cruel. Inez poured herself a cup of tea, watching the steam rise from the mug. The quiet was almost suffocating. She thought back to all the times she'd put her family first, putting her own needs aside. The endless sacrifices, the quiet nights alone, always in the background, always second. And now, this betrayal. Her hands trembled as she set the cup down and glanced at the drawer where she had hidden the bank statements. She didn't have to open them again. She knew exactly what they said, what they had done. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Emily and Mark thought they could get away with it. For all their wealth, for all their lavish trips and dinners, They hadn't even bothered to give her a simple, happy birthday. Inez had always been the silent type, always the one who kept her feelings to herself.
But now?
Now was different. Inez had a plan. She wasn't going to just sit by and let them continue to think they could control her. She would play the long game. The right moment would come, and when it did, the truth would be so much more powerful. She would make sure of it. But before she could begin her next steps, she had to gather more information. She had to understand exactly how deep their lies ran. She knew Mark. She had seen the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, the way he treated her like an inconvenience. And Emily? Her daughter had always been the golden child, the one everyone adored, but in Inez's heart, she knew something had changed over the years. Inez couldn't help but wonder how far her daughter would go to maintain the illusion of perfection. She had always relied on Inez for everything, until now. The money had been her ticket to freedom, and Inez's silence had been her prison. But now, that prison was about to break wide open. Inez picked up the phone with a steady hand, despite the thunderous beating of her heart. She knew this moment had been coming, but nothing could prepare her for what Emily was about to say. She raised the receiver to her ear, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hello. Inez, it's Emily." Her daughter's voice crackled from the other end, thick with an artificial sweetness that Inez had grown all too familiar with over the years. "I'm so sorry I didn't call yesterday, Mom. Things just got crazy with Mark and me. You know how it is. I hope you're doing okay." Inez clenched her jaw. Emily's words were smooth, rehearsed, but Inez wasn't fooled. She had learned the art of manipulation long ago, and it stung now more than ever. The words hung in the air, empty and hollow. She couldn't believe her daughter had the audacity to act as though nothing had happened. "I'm fine," Inez replied coolly, her voice unwavering. "Just spending the day alone like usual. It's no big deal. I'm used to it." There was a long silence on the other end, a hesitation that almost made Inez laugh. Emily had no idea how much her words sounded like a rehearsed lie. I know we should have been there for you, and we really should have celebrated together. Mark and I just got caught up with everything. But listen, I was thinking maybe we could do something special next weekend? Just the three of us. I promise we'll make it up to you, okay?" Inez's blood ran cold. Next weekend? It wasn't the fact that Emily had asked her to wait. It was the fact that the apology felt so forced, so contrived. There was no genuine remorse in her voice, just the uncomfortable feeling of trying to placate someone you've wronged without actually acknowledging the depth of the betrayal. "And what about my pension, Emily?" Inez said, her voice suddenly sharp, piercing through the polite facade. "How do you plan to make that up to me?" There was a noticeable shift on the other end. Inez could almost hear Emily stiffen, the air thick with tension. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice suddenly defensive, though she tried to mask it with a laugh. "You know, Mark and I have been really busy with our lives. But we're family, Mom. We wouldn't do anything to hurt you." Inez felt the sting of her daughter's words, the same ones she'd used to justify every wrong she had ever done. "We're family." It was always a convenient excuse to do whatever they wanted, to take without giving anything back. Inez's heart burned, but she didn't back down. "I saw the bank statements, Emily," she said, her voice unwavering. "I know what you and Mark have been doing with my money, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. Not anymore." There was a pause, so long it felt like time had frozen. Emily's voice, when it came again, was no longer the sweet, apologetic tone from before. Now it was tight, strained, and panic-laced. "Mom, wait. What are you talking about? Those are just mistakes, okay? We were trying to help you, really. We thought you wouldn't mind. Please, don't make this harder than it has to be. Let's just move on, okay?" Inez felt her blood boil, but she wasn't about to back down. She knew now more than ever that it was time to take control of her life, to take back what was rightfully hers.
"No, Emily.
It's too late for that. You've crossed a line, and I'm not going to stand by while you destroy everything I've worked for." Her words hung in the air like a threat, silent but deafening. Inez could almost feel the shock on the other end of the line. She wasn't the naive woman they thought she was. No, she was far from it. I'm going to make sure you and Mark understand the consequences of your actions, Inez continued. And I promise, I won't rest until you pay for what you've done. The finality in her voice was unmistakable. She wasn't speaking out of anger anymore. This was a plan. A promise. Emily didn't reply. There was only the sound of shallow breaths, followed by a soft click as the call ended. Inez stared at the phone for a moment, her heart still racing. She had just thrown the first stone in a battle that would change everything. But this was only the beginning. Now, Inez had to figure out how to bring everything to light. The days following the phone call felt like a strange kind of silence. Inez's heart pounded in her chest every time she thought about the conversation. Emily hadn't called back, and neither had Mark. It was as though they had disappeared into thin air, no longer able to face the consequences of their betrayal. But Inez knew they were still out there, still living their lives, still enjoying the money they had stolen from her. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the pile of receipts and bank statements in front of her, each one more damning than the last. She had kept track of every withdrawal, every transfer, and every purchase made using her hard-earned pension fund. Inez was nothing if not thorough, and she knew that the evidence was irrefutable. The more she looked at the papers, the more her resolve solidified. She couldn't let them get away with this. They thought they had outsmarted her, but they had underestimated her strength. The woman they thought was weak and invisible had just begun to fight. Inez knew she needed to act, but she didn't want to do anything in haste. This needed to be done methodically, carefully, and with precision. She couldn't risk making a mistake. The stakes were too high, and her entire future depended on getting this right. Her mind raced with ideas, options that had never occurred to her before. She had worked hard for this money. She had sacrificed for her family, and now she would fight to protect what was hers. She would start with the lawyer. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the phone. The number was etched in her memory, a lifeline that had always been there for her in the past. She dialed the number, watching the clock tick in the background. "Hello, this is Charles Hayward," a calm voice answered on the other end. "I need your help," Inez said, her voice steady, but her heart pounding in her chest. "It's about my pension. My daughter and her husband have been taking it without my permission. I have the evidence, and I need to know what I can do about it." The lawyer was quiet for a moment, then spoke, his voice low. "Inez, are you sure about this? You're not just imagining things? It could get ugly, you know that, right?" "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I've got all the proof. And I'm not letting them get away with it. I want to take action." "I understand," he said after a beat. "I'll help you. I'll start looking into it. I'll need the documents, the bank statements, everything you've got. We'll make sure this is handled the right way." Inez felt a weight lift from her chest. It wasn't over yet, but she had just taken a significant step forward. She had the law on her side, and now, Emily and Mark would know what it felt like to face the consequences of their greed. But Inez wasn't done yet. She needed to keep up the pressure. She needed to remind them that she wasn't the quiet, invisible grandmother they thought she was. No, she had a voice, and it was louder than ever. The next day, Inez drove to the bank with the pile of documents in hand. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, but it quickly faded when she saw the seriousness in Inez's eyes. "I need to speak to someone about my account," Inez said, her voice calm but unwavering. A few minutes later, the bank manager, a young woman with sharp features, ushered Inez into her office. Inez laid the documents out on the desk, and the manager's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "I had no idea," the manager murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. This is serious. I'll help you, Mrs. Taylor. I'll make sure everything gets sorted out." Inez smiled faintly, the first sign of triumph she'd felt in days. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is just the beginning." The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and paperwork. Inez could feel the weight of each decision she made. Each move she took felt like a step closer to something big, something she couldn't turn back from. Her lawyer, Charles Hayward, had been thorough in his approach, gathering all the evidence they needed to take legal action. The papers Inez had collected, the receipts, the bank transfers, the hidden statements, were all proof of her daughter and son-in-law's betrayal. She had no doubt now that they would pay for what they had done. Yet, as the days wore on, Inez began to notice something unsettling. Emily and Mark seemed to be avoiding her. There were no more phone calls, no more texts, no more false apologies. It was as if they had vanished from her life completely. The silence between them stretched further, and Inez couldn't help but wonder if they had caught wind of her plan. On the 5th day after her meeting with the bank, Inez was sitting in her living room, reviewing the final pieces of evidence, when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't heard from Emily or Mark in days, and she had no friends who would drop by unannounced. So when she opened the door, she was surprised to see a man in a dark suit standing on her porch, holding a briefcase. "Inez Taylor?" he asked, his voice cool, professional. "Yes, that's me," she replied, suddenly wary. The man extended a hand. "I'm Mark Daniels. I'm with a firm that's representing your daughter and son-in-law. They've asked me to deliver a settlement offer regarding your pension fund." Inez's heart skipped a beat. A settlement offer? She had to restrain herself from laughing out loud. She could already feel the manipulation in his tone, the sense that they were trying to buy her silence. She had expected them to react, but this was faster than she thought. "I'm listening," Inez said, her voice calm but filled with an underlying fury. Mark Daniels opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder with neatly stacked papers. "Your daughter and her husband are willing to offer you a sum of money in exchange for dropping the legal action." A generous offer, I'd say, given the situation. Inez raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress the smirk that threatened to break through. "A generous offer," she repeated, her voice icy. "And what's the price of my silence, Mr. Daniels?" He didn't flinch, but the slight twitch of his mouth betrayed his discomfort. "It's a fair offer. They just want to put this behind them. They've expressed remorse, and they would like to move forward without further escalation." Inez stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of her next decision bearing down on her. She knew what she had to do, but it still stung. These people, her own flesh and blood, thought they could buy her off. They thought that because she was older, she wouldn't have the fight in her to see this through. They were wrong. She glanced at the papers in front of her, the sum of money they were offering her. It wasn't enough to compensate for what they had taken from her, not by a long shot. And besides, it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle of it. It was about the betrayal. It was about taking a stand. "No," Inez said, her voice firm and steady. "I won't accept this offer. You tell your clients that I'll be seeing them in court." The man blinked, clearly caught off guard by her refusal. I think you're making a mistake, Mrs. Taylor. The consequences of going to court could be much worse for you. You may lose everything." Inez smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I've already lost everything, Mr. Daniels. But I'll be damned if I let them take what little I have left without a fight." The lawyer's expression faltered, but he quickly recovered. "I'll inform them of your decision, but I advise you to think carefully." As he turned to leave, Inez stood in the doorway, watching him walk down the path. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but there was no fear in her. Only a quiet, steady resolve. She was going to win this fight. She wasn't going to be silenced or bought off. They had pushed her too far. The days following Inez's decision were filled with a quiet but determined tension. Her phone remained silent, the kind of silence that made her feel as though the world was holding its breath. Emily and Mark had yet to respond, and the only sounds in Inez's house were the ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional rustle of the papers she had so meticulously gathered. She had never felt so alive, so empowered, despite the overwhelming weight of everything she was about to do. Every inch of her body had been trained to be patient, to be kind, to be forgiving. But not this time. This time, she was fighting for herself, for the justice that had eluded her for so long. But as the days passed, Inez couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big. The air in her home felt thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that comes before a storm. She could feel Emily and Mark's silence pressing down on her, and for the first time, Inez felt like they were no longer just avoiding her. They were preparing for something. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed her living room in soft golden light, Inez's suspicions were confirmed. The doorbell rang again. Inez hesitated for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not after her confrontation with Mark Daniels. She stood up, her legs stiff, as though they had been frozen in place. With every step toward the door, she felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins. She knew that whatever waited for her on the other side of that door would change everything. She opened the door to find Emily standing on the porch, her face pale, her eyes red as though she had been crying. Mark stood just behind her, his face tight with frustration, his eyes darting back and forth, avoiding Inez's gaze. "Mom," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." Inez didn't move. She stood there, arms crossed, staring at the daughter she had once loved more than life itself. Emily was trying to play the victim now, and Inez could see right through it. It didn't matter how many tears were in her eyes or how broken she looked. The betrayal had already been done. "I think you've said everything that needs to be said already," Inez replied coolly, her voice steady. "And I've made my decision. There's nothing left to talk about." Mark shifted uncomfortably, but Emily held her ground. "Mom, please. You don't understand what's going on. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. Mark and I..." She stopped herself, as if realizing too late that this wasn't going to work. "We're sorry. We should have never touched your money, but we were under so much pressure. We thought we'd be able to pay it back before you noticed. We didn't want this to tear us apart." Inez's eyes narrowed. "So now you're asking for my forgiveness? After everything you've done? You think a few tears and some sorries will make it all go away?" Mark stepped forward, his voice harsh. "It's not that simple, Inez. We've been through a lot. We've made mistakes, yes. But we don't have the money to pay you back right now. If you take us to court, you'll destroy us. Do you really want to do that to your family?" Inez held his gaze. She had heard enough. The excuses, the false regret, the fear in their eyes, it was all part of the game they were playing. But Inez wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. "You've already destroyed yourselves," Inez said, her voice low but full of conviction. "You've been destroying me for years, and now you think I'm supposed to let you off the hook because you're afraid of what might happen? You've taken everything from me, and now I'm taking it back." Mark's face twisted in anger, but Emily stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Mom, please, I know we've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. But this isn't who we are. You know I love you. We didn't know how else to fix things." Inez shook her head slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. She had spent so much of her life loving and caring for them, but in the end, they had only taken from her. She wasn't going to let it continue. "Don't come here with lies," she said, her voice growing colder. "I've heard enough." With that, she stepped back, closing the door in their faces. She could hear their muffled voices through the wood, but she didn't care anymore. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. The battle for her pension, for her dignity, had just begun. The days that followed were unlike any Inez had ever experienced. There was a sharpness to everything around her. Every sound, every movement, every conversation felt heightened, like the world itself was watching her. She had made her stand, but the quiet victory she had hoped for felt like it was slipping away. She could sense the storm building on the horizon, but the question lingered. What would Emily and Mark do next? Inez had prepared herself for some kind of retaliation. She had known, deep down, that confronting her daughter and son-in-law would ignite a firestorm. But she never imagined it would come to this. One afternoon, as Inez was going over some old family photographs in the living room, the phone rang again. It was the kind of phone call that made her pulse quicken, a call she had been expecting but had hoped would never come. "Hello. Inez, it's Charles Hayward." The lawyer's voice crackled through the line. "I need you to sit down." This is serious. Inez felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What's going on? I've just received a court summons, Charles said, his voice grim. Emily and Mark are pressing charges against you. They're claiming you're attempting to steal their property, that you're harassing them. They've even brought in the police. The words hit Inez like a slap in the face. She sat down hard in the chair, her mind racing. They were turning the tables on her, playing the victim. She could feel the anger rise in her chest, but it wasn't the type of anger that made you want to lash out. It was cold, calculated, like the deep, quiet rage that builds before a storm breaks. Are you telling me they're going to accuse me of harassment? Inez's voice shook, but it wasn't from fear. It was from disbelief, from the sheer audacity of it all. I'm afraid so, Charles said. But don't worry, we'll fight this. I'll need you to bring in everything you have, the receipts, the bank statements, and most importantly, the evidence of their theft. We're going to counter their claims with everything we've got. Inez was silent for a moment. The weight of the situation was starting to hit her. Emily and Mark were desperate. They had to be. They knew they were losing, and now they were trying to make her the villain. But Inez wasn't going to let them turn this around. She wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. All right, Inez said, her voice cold but determined. I'll bring the documents to you first thing tomorrow. Good, Charles replied. And don't let them intimidate you, Inez. They may have money and connections, but you have the truth. And the truth will always win in the end. Inez hung up the phone, her fingers still trembling. The phone call had rattled her, but it also solidified something deep inside her. She was in this for the long haul. Emily and Mark thought they could bury her, but they had underestimated the fire in her soul. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That evening, Inez took the time to gather all the evidence she had. Every receipt, every bank statement, every document that showed the truth of what had happened. She could feel the weight of it all, like the burden of carrying years of betrayal, loss, and silence, now finally coming to light. She had kept it all locked away for so long, but now it was time to make them face it. Inez knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even just about the pension. This was about respect. This was about showing her daughter and son-in-law that they couldn't walk all over her anymore. She was done being the invisible woman in their lives. But as she finished gathering the papers, there was a sudden knock on the door. A sharp, insistent knock that made her freeze. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the timing was suspicious. Her pulse quickened as she walked to the door, the sense of foreboding growing stronger with each step. She opened the door, and standing there in the doorway was a police officer. The man was tall, with a stern face, his uniform pressed and pristine. He held a clipboard in one hand, his eyes scanning Inez carefully. "Mrs. Inez Taylor?" the officer asked, his voice authoritative. Inez nodded. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Reynolds. I've been instructed to serve you with a restraining order," he said, handing her the clipboard. "Your daughter and son-in-law have filed charges against you, claiming harassment and threatening behavior. You are legally prohibited from contacting them or coming within 100 feet of their residence." Inez's heart dropped into her stomach. A restraining order? They were trying to make her the criminal? She took the paper from the officer's hands, her mind racing. Emily and Mark were pulling every card they had, throwing everything at her to break her spirit. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. "Is this for real?" Inez asked, her voice quiet, her gaze never leaving the officer's. "Yes, ma'am," the officer replied. "If you violate this order, you could be arrested." The officer turned to leave, but Inez stood frozen at the door, staring at the restraining order in her hand. This was the last thing she had expected. They were willing to go this far to keep their lies intact, to force her into submission. But Inez was no stranger to hard times. She had been through hell and back, and now it was time for her to make her stand. They were trying to bury her under lies, under false accusations, but she wasn't going to let them win. As the officer walked away, Inez took a deep breath and closed the door. Her hands trembled as she looked at the restraining order again, but this time, there was no fear. There was only determination. Inez's world had shifted in an instant. The restraining order was a gut punch, one she hadn't seen coming, and yet, in some strange way, she wasn't surprised. Emily and Mark were desperate now, pulling out all the stops to stop her from exposing them. They had underestimated her before, but now they were playing dirty, using every legal trick in the book to silence her. But Inez had been down this road before. She'd faced hard times, fought battles that seemed impossible, and somehow, she had always come out stronger. She wasn't about to let them push her around.
Not now.
Not after everything she had sacrificed for them. The officer's visit had left a bad taste in her mouth, but it also fueled a fire inside her. She wasn't backing down, and this restraining order? It was just another obstacle. And she was going to tear it down, piece by piece. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Inez sat in her dimly lit living room, her hands gripping the restraining order like it was a lifeline. She had a plan.
She always did.
The next day, she walked into Charles Hayward's office, the weight of the world on her shoulders, but a new sense of purpose in her step. When the door closed behind her, Charles looked up from his desk, his eyebrows furrowed. "Inez, what's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I've seen the restraining order. This is bad, very bad." Inez placed the document on his desk, her eyes steely. "It's not going to stop me, Charles. It's just another game they're playing. And I'm done playing their games." Charles hesitated, looking over the restraining order. He took a deep breath. "I understand your resolve, Inez, but this is serious. If you violate this order, things could escalate very quickly. You could end up in jail. I don't want to see that happen to you." "I don't care anymore," Inez said, her voice unwavering. "They've taken everything from me, Charles. My money, my dignity, my trust. I've fought for my family my whole life, and now, they've stolen from me. I'm not going to let them get away with it." Charles sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He'd worked with Inez long enough to know that when she made up her mind, there was no stopping her. But even he knew that this was a dangerous game she was playing. "I'll help you," he said finally, his tone reluctant but resolute. "But you have to promise me you'll be careful. If we do this, we do it smart. No more impulsive decisions. We need to gather everything we can, and we need to be strategic." Inez nodded. "I know. I've already been collecting the evidence. I'll get everything we need." "I'm glad you're not giving up," Charles said, looking at her with a mix of admiration and caution. "But let's take this one step at a time. First, we'll file a motion to have the restraining order dropped, then we'll hit them with the counterclaim. We need to turn the tables on them before they get a chance to dig in their heels." As they discussed the next steps, Inez felt a flicker of hope ignite inside her. She was no longer the quiet grandmother who sat in the background. She was fighting back, and with every decision, she was gaining ground. Emily and Mark had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the power of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Later that week, Inez filed her motion. She watched as Charles worked tirelessly, carefully crafting their case, gathering every shred of evidence that proved Emily and Mark's guilt. Each day that passed, Inez grew more determined. She knew this would be a long and difficult fight, but she wasn't afraid. The truth was on her side, and that was all she needed. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no word from Emily or Mark. Inez had expected them to fight back harder, to throw more legal obstacles her way. But nothing came. Instead, there was a quiet that hung in the air, a stillness that made her uneasy. Were they planning something else? Were they waiting for her to slip up? Then, one afternoon, as Inez sat in her living room with her latest stack of paperwork, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find a delivery man holding a large, sealed envelope. Without a word, the man handed it to her, turned, and walked away. Inez stared at the envelope for a moment before opening it. Inside was a letter from Emily's lawyer. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter, her heart racing. The contents were a shock to her. The letter was a formal notice that Emily and Mark had decided to settle the case out of court. They were willing to pay back every penny they had taken from her, plus interest, in exchange for dropping all legal action. Inez couldn't believe it. After everything they'd put her through, after the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. They were offering her money as if it could erase the damage they had caused. Her fingers tightened around the letter. She wasn't going to let them buy their way out of this. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice, about standing up for herself and for the woman she had been for so many years. She had worked too hard, given too much, and fought too long to let them get away with it. Inez stood at the window, the letter still clutched tightly in her hands. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, but the warmth from the sunlight did little to ease the cold, simmering anger within her. She had been through so much. Her life had been a series of sacrifices, of putting others before herself. And now, here she was, standing on the precipice of a battle that would define her future. The letter from Emily and Mark's lawyer was an insult. A cheap attempt to buy her silence, to make her forget what they had done. They thought money could fix everything. They thought that a few zeros on a check could erase the years of betrayal, the years of taking her for granted. Inez walked over to the table, her eyes still fixed on the letter. She set it down slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She had spent sleepless nights thinking about it. The money was tempting. She could take the settlement, live comfortably for the rest of her days, and let them go on with their lives. But that wasn't enough. No amount of money could fix the hurt, the betrayal, the years she had spent being overlooked. No amount of money could give her back her dignity, her trust in the people she had loved the most. And no, she wasn't going to let them walk away scot-free. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming everything they had taken from her. It was about sending a message. Inez's resolve grew stronger. She wouldn't accept their offer. She would fight them in court, expose everything, and make them pay for what they had done. The next morning, Inez woke up early, her mind already racing with plans for the next steps. She had work to do. There were more documents to gather, more evidence to collect, more people to contact. The real fight was about to begin, and she was ready. As she sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the files with Charles, the phone rang again. Inez paused, a chill running down her spine. This was it. This was either the calm before the storm or the final attempt at peace. She picked up the phone. "Hello?" "Inez," came the voice on the other end. It was Emily. Her voice was strained, her usual sweet tone gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Please." Inez's grip tightened on the receiver. She didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to entertain her pleading. But a small part of her, a tiny flicker of the mother she used to be, felt something stir. This was her daughter, the girl she had raised, the girl she had sacrificed so much for. And now she was asking to meet. "I'm listening," Inez said, her voice steady but guarded. "Please, Mom." Emily's voice cracked. "We've been through so much. Mark and I realize what we've done and we're sorry. But I'm asking you, from the bottom of my heart, to let this go. Let's settle this privately. I don't want it to go to court. I don't want the family torn apart." Inez felt a pang of something deep inside her. She knew this wasn't real remorse. It was the panic of someone who was losing control, someone who thought they could still fix everything with a few words. But she couldn't let herself be fooled. Not anymore. "No, Emily," Inez said, her voice firm. "It's too late for apologies. It's too late for empty promises. You and Mark have already destroyed everything between us. This isn't about the family anymore. This is about justice." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Inez wondered if Emily was going to hang up. But then Emily spoke again, her voice low and trembling. "I'm scared, Mom. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to fix this."
I'm sorry.
"I truly am." Inez closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She could feel the weight of her decisions settling into her chest. This wasn't easy. It never had been. But she couldn't back down now. Not when the truth was so close to the surface. She couldn't let Emily get away with playing the victim. Not anymore. "I'm sorry too, Emily," Inez said quietly. "But this isn't about you anymore. This is about me getting what's mine, and you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions." With that, Inez hung up the phone, her hand trembling. She knew she had just closed the door on a part of her life she would never get back. The final thread of hope that had tied her to her daughter was now gone. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. Inez met with Charles regularly, going over every detail, making sure their case was airtight. They subpoenaed records, interviewed witnesses, and continued gathering evidence. With each passing day, Inez felt more confident. She was ready to take Emily and Mark down. But as the court date approached, Inez began to notice strange things happening. There were whispers. People in the neighborhood, acquaintances she had known for years, suddenly seemed distant. There were rumors spreading, rumors that Inez was crazy, that she had lost her mind, that she was doing all of this out of spite. Emily and Mark had begun their own campaign, turning people against her. Inez wasn't surprised. She had expected it. This was the final move in their game. They were trying to destroy her reputation, to make her seem like the villain, but Inez wasn't going to let that happen. She would face them in court, and she would make sure everyone knew the truth. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for the truth, for the justice she deserved, and for the strength she had found in herself after so many years of being silenced. The courtroom was a cold, intimidating place. Inez had always imagined it differently, a place where justice was served, where the truth would shine through no matter how dark the lies. But today, it felt like a battleground. The stakes were higher than ever, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Inez walked into the room with her head held high, her posture straight and strong. She had spent her entire life putting others first, allowing herself to be pushed aside. But not today. Today, she was reclaiming everything: her dignity, her voice, and her right to justice. She wasn't the quiet grandmother in the corner anymore. She was the woman who had fought through years of silence and had come out stronger. Charles Hayward was by her side, his presence a calm reassurance. He had been her ally through this entire process, and today he was going to help her take back what was rightfully hers. As Inez sat in the witness chair, she glanced over at Emily and Mark. Her daughter's face was pale, her eyes red as though she had been crying. Mark, on the other hand, looked as smug as ever, his confidence unshaken by the mounting evidence against him. They had thought they could outsmart her, thought they could buy their way out of this. But Inez wasn't going to let that happen. The trial began, and Inez's heart pounded in her chest. She had prepared herself for this moment, but the weight of it still made her stomach churn. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for everything she had lost: her trust, her love, her sense of self. The years of pain, the years of sacrifice, had led her here, and she wasn't going to back down now. Charles stood up and addressed the judge, his voice calm and authoritative. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mrs. Taylor's daughter and son-in-law have betrayed her trust and stolen her hard-earned pension. We have evidence that proves their guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt. We have the bank statements, the receipts, the transactions that show exactly what they've done." Inez watched as Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw clenched. Emily avoided her gaze, her hands trembling as she fidgeted in her chair. They were scared, and they should be. Charles turned to Inez, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Taylor, would you like to explain the situation to the court?" Inez nodded, taking a deep breath as she stood. Her voice rang out in the quiet courtroom, strong and clear. "I've spent my entire life taking care of my family. I raised my daughter. I worked hard every single day, and I did everything I could to make sure they had everything they needed. But what did I get in return? I got betrayal. I got lies. I got taken advantage of by the people I loved the most." She paused, looking directly at Emily and Mark. "You think money can fix everything, don't you? You think you can buy your way out of this, that if you pay me off, I'll forget about everything you've done. But you're wrong. This isn't just about money. This is about respect. This is about the years of sacrifice, the years of love that you've thrown away." Inez's voice wavered for a moment, but she steadied herself. "I trusted you. I loved you. And you betrayed me. You took what was mine, what I had worked my whole life for, and you used it for your own selfish desires. I won't let that go. Not anymore." The courtroom was silent as Inez finished speaking. She could feel the weight of every word, every emotion she had buried for so long, now laid bare for everyone to see. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally being heard. Charles picked up where Inez left off, presenting the evidence with precision. The bank statements, the transaction records, the emails, they all painted a clear picture of Emily and Mark's actions. There was no room for doubt. They had stolen from Inez, and now they were going to face the consequences. The defense attorney for Emily and Mark tried to argue, but it was clear to everyone in the room that their case was crumbling. They tried to shift the blame, to paint Inez as the villain, but the evidence was undeniable. The lies had caught up with them, and there was nowhere left to hide. After what felt like hours, the judge finally addressed the court. "I have heard the evidence, and I have seen the proof presented. I find in favor of Mrs. Taylor. The court orders that Emily and Mark must pay back every penny they have taken from her, along with interest. Additionally, they will face criminal charges for their actions." Inez felt the weight of the words hit her like a wave. She had won. It was over. The truth had finally come to light, and the justice she had been fighting for was hers. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief, of victory. Emily and Mark sat in stunned silence as the judge's gavel slammed down. They had lost, and there was nothing they could do to change that. Inez stood up slowly, her legs shaking, but her heart light. She had done it. She had taken back what was hers. As she walked out of the courtroom, Charles by her side, she couldn't help but smile. The fight had been long, and the cost had been high, but in the end, the truth had triumphed. The days following the courtroom victory felt surreal to Inez. She had spent her entire life working hard, sacrificing everything for her family. And now, she was standing on the other side of betrayal, her feet firm on the ground. The judgment had been handed down, but the victory didn't come with the celebration she had once imagined. It was quieter, more personal, something deep inside her that no amount of money could replace. Inez sat alone in her living room, the house now eerily silent. The weight of the past few months, the betrayal, the fight, and the emotional exhaustion had taken its toll. But for the first time in years, Inez felt something close to peace. She had won her battle. She had stood up for herself in a way she never had before. There was no applause, no grand gestures, no victory parade. But Inez didn't need that. She had taken back her dignity, and that was worth more than anything else. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up absently. It was a message from Charles Hayward. "Inez, I wanted to let you know that the settlement has been finalized. The money is on its way, and your pension fund is now fully restored. It's all over now." Inez stared at the message for a moment, absorbing the words. She had done it. The truth had won. The money had been returned, and with it, her sense of justice. The years of betrayal had been undone, and Emily and Mark had faced the consequences of their greed. But even as she read the message, she couldn't help but wonder, what now? The battle had been long, and the victory had been sweet. But the cost had been high. Emily and Mark had been exposed for what they were: selfish, manipulative, and deceitful. And yet, even after everything, Inez couldn't bring herself to hate them. What they had done to her was unforgivable. Yes, but in some strange way, Inez felt sorry for them. They had lost more than just money. They had lost her trust, her love, and in the end, they had lost the family they had taken for granted. Inez stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the neighborhood she had known for so many years. The world outside was still turning, life was still going on, but for her, everything had changed. She had fought for what was hers, and in the process, she had found a strength she never knew she had. She thought about the future. She had her pension back, and she was free to live the rest of her life on her own terms. No longer would she be at the mercy of anyone. She had learned that the greatest strength a person could have was the ability to fight for themselves, no matter how old they were. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Inez walked slowly to the door, a feeling of unease creeping into her chest. She opened it, and standing there was Emily. Her daughter looked different, vulnerable, broken. The confident, entitled woman who had stood in front of her just weeks ago was gone. Emily's face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She held a small box in her hands, wrapped in plain brown paper. I know it's too late, but I wanted to come and apologize, Emily said, her voice shaky. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm sorry. For everything. Inez stood in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she didn't know what to feel. Part of her wanted to slam the door and never look back. Another part of her, a part she hadn't wanted to acknowledge, felt a flicker of something familiar, something she hadn't felt for years. Motherly love. Emily held out the box. This is for you. It's the only thing I can give you to make up for everything. Inez took the box slowly, her fingers brushing against the brown paper. She didn't know what was inside, but she knew that this was the end. The final moment of a chapter that had been filled with pain, betrayal, and heartbreak. And now it was over. Inez opened the box, and inside, she found a simple, old-fashioned locket. It was beautiful, delicate, and engraved with the words, "Family is forever." Tears welled up in Inez's eyes as she closed the box. She hadn't expected this, didn't know what to make of it. Emily stood there, her eyes filled with remorse, waiting for her mother's response. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mom. I don't expect it, but I hope, one day, you'll know that I am truly sorry for what I did. Inez looked at her daughter, the emotions that had been buried for so long rising to the surface. She thought about the years of love, the years of hurt. She thought about the woman standing in front of her, the woman who had once been her little girl. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. When she opened them again, she saw Emily's tear-streaked face, waiting for her judgment. Inez took a deep breath, the weight of everything crashing down on her. I forgive you, Emily, Inez said softly, her voice filled with quiet strength. But don't ever forget what you've done. And don't think that just because I've forgiven you, things will go back to how they were. You can never take back what you did, but you can choose to do better from here on out. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. I will, Mom. I promise. As Inez closed the door and stood there alone, she felt a sense of finality wash over her. The battle was over. The fight for her dignity, her trust, and her future had been won. She had finally taken back what was hers. And now she could finally move on. The future was hers to shape, and she would no longer be held captive by the mistakes of the past. Final thoughts. Inez had spent a lifetime caring for others, letting them take advantage of her kindness. But in the end, she had found her strength, her voice, and her justice. She had fought back, and in doing so, she had discovered a powerful truth, that even in the darkest of times, it's never too late to stand up for what's right. Inez's journey was one of betrayal, pain, and ultimately, redemption. Thank you for following her story. If it touched your heart, leave a comment below, share it with others who may need a reminder that it's never too late to fight for yourself, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength, courage, and triumph.